So this is part 3 of my mini series of meetings with you to talk about humanistic astrology, the work of Dane Rudhyar. There is so much into it, but I wanted to start with something. And we started with The Practice of Astrology, that book by Rudhyar that is laying out some of the core principles of his philosophy and his astrology. And to me, it is a foundational work that I wanted to offer you to go through together, step by step. And today we are concentrating on planetary cycles and aspects. This is around the middle of the book. We already looked at the other side of things, the introduction, the meaning of planets, signs, and the zodiac as a whole last time. But now we're going to be looking at my favorite topic, which is always very fascinating and very interesting. And I hope you can share as well whether you're using this method of looking at aspects as a process, which is, I think, something that only Dane Rudhyar really talks about in his work and uses and demonstrates a way that we can look at that and have an alternative to what is being discussed in most places, in most textbooks, as a standard just geometrical view of aspects that we're only seeing them as angles in the chart. There is a mixture of both of these techniques that will probably give us the best results. But we'll go step by step and see what we can discover together. Now, every time we start here, there are 13 basic steps of acquiring astrological wisdom that Dane Rudhyar is offering to us in the practice of astrology. Just very briefly mentioning for those of you that are new or watching this for the first time that on this website here you can find the book for free and read it. And give me some feedback as well. Please don't worry if you, haven't completely grasped something that we have discussed during the discussion, because we're limited in time, and maybe I don't know how much time there will be left at the end. But you can write in the group, or you can leave comments underneath the videos, whichever you like. So don't be shy. Do that if you wish. Now, where do I start? This is step 7 in the book, and it's called Acquiring a Sense of Form and Accentuation. Let's look at that quote. Form, in the general and abstract sense of the word, has almost the same meaning as structure, but it applies more specifically to the result of the perception by an individual of the wholeness of the whole. A picture and the body have form as we see them in their entirety. Form can thus be considered as the outer manifestation of inner structure. Okay, all very abstract here, but this is going to be the focus of what I want to point your attention to today. Something that so many of us don't think about enough, I think, again. And it is part of the same idea. We're repeating the same big idea of the whole is more important than the parts, the holistic philosophy that Dane Rudhyar is trying to visualize and explain in so many different examples. Now, aspects will be our thing, that we'll have it demonstrated, I guess, one more time. So little by little, this could become, I hope, a more fixed and more something that we are used to, and we don't need to explain that many times. So the idea of form and form in astrology, this ability to take a look, open our eyes, take a look at the world and see one whole thing, which is obviously a sum total of many parts that are interrelated and interacting in that moment. And we're able to perceive the structure of something by this wholeness of the form that we witness. And this is the approach to the chart that can reveal additional things to us, and not just the positions of every single planet in a sign or in a house and the aspects that they make individually to each other, but we are able to perceive what's beyond that and what's maybe higher than that. So Now, these are patterns, and the word Gestalt means form, is in psychology, you probably have heard of Gestalt psychology, where the perception of human beings of all sorts of different forms and patterns is used as a starting point to analyze and maybe also give explanation to different perceptions that lead to psychological complexes, or on the other hand, ways of overcoming different complexes or different things that psychologically may be a challenge to us, and using this perception as a way of diagnosing different kinds of people and different categories of understanding, and then approach to knowledge, to emotional work, and so on, that could be valid for the individual person. So you have these different optical illusions that are a practical demonstration of our perception of form out there in the world. And I like the example that Rudhyar is giving in the practice of astrology of this standing out one factor or thing in the background of everything that we are seeing in a particular moment. So he's saying, let's suppose we're looking at a green background, and then if we have something red on that background, obviously that is going to stand out. So we can see that by looking at things as a whole, different things catch our attention depending on where they are in the overall pattern, in the overall picture. If you're observing a photograph or a painting, this is very important to try to look at that as a whole and to sense it and kind of have a feeling with it without necessarily analyzing every single corner or every single thing in it separately, because that's going to show us something additional. And this whole conversation is to do with realizing how important that is and how we can try to have that perception when we look at the entirety of the circle of the birth chart as well, and start from there, rather than quickly jumping into those different things that we can find, investigate, and then try to put meaning to by simply listing them one by one. And you can see that this can get us into a much more confusing way of trying to get into a pattern or a meaning. So here we have the birth chart. This is just an example. That happens to be the birth chart of Sigmund Freud. And it's for the fact that the birth chart is a two-dimensional model of the universe. And it is a circle on which we project those pieces of information that we have decided selectively to use from all the astronomical data that we have on our disposal. We are limiting ourselves to 10 planets, some other points like the Arabic parts, the nodes of the moon, and so on. And different astrologers, of course, can decide to use different things. But this mini model of the universe is a frame of reference. And when we look at it, certain things start standing out. And it is not perfect. Want it or not, we have to use this for now, but it is a much more comprehensive model that is revealing shapes and forms, as contrast to, for example, the old style square chart or rectangular chart that some astrologers were using in the past. And you know that in Vedic astrology, up to this date, we have a different looking chart. That is not allowing to see the distribution of the different planets in the houses and in the signs of the zodiac, and how, when you look at that chart, for example, here, you can immediately figure out that there is a juxtaposition of many planets located on one side around the descendant area of the chart, and just a couple of things. If we look just at planets, we can signal out Mars on the other side of the chart, and we can say also the south node, but it is not a planet, and sometimes it is not even looked at by astrologers in the chart. I always look at it because they come as a pair. The south node and the north node cannot be separated. They're on axis. And I personally believe it's very important to count that as well. But in this chart, we have a certain, on the first balance, is this balance going on. We have many things on one side and just Mars on the other. So that means something is the idea here, that we cannot disregard that. And later on, we'll come back to this chart to see how something very crucial could be missed and not appreciated. And maybe we can then make another conclusion of where certain patterns in the life journey of that person come from, can be related, for example, to this Mars singled out in this way on this portion of the chart. Now, 4 in astrology is directly demonstrated in the two-dimensional model of the birth chart. That's what we have to play with, to exercise our perception on, and different people will see different things. But we have the sense of astrological form, which is good to kind of try to teach ourselves to be utilizing. Let's take a look at these two other quotes by Rudhyar. The sense of astrological form is with us to stay, he says, and its practical use is indispensable to full attainment of astrological wisdom. All that can really be discussed is its relative importance among the other and more traditional tools used by the astrologer in his or her interpretations. So I know that maybe at this stage this is not completely clear if you're new to that concept, but it will become clear, I hope, later on. It is something that we need to, I guess, add to our arsenal if we want to be more comprehensive in our work and to not kind of oversee and disregard pattern that is determining the dynamic relationship between all the factors in the chart and how they interpenetrate one another. So here Rudhyar says that, for example, Jupiter in Leo, Sun in the 3rd house, Mars square Saturn mean nothing final in themselves. They are at best the raw materials from which vital meanings can be molded by the perceptive effort and the visualizing intuitive skill of the astrologer. The letters love, L-O-V-A-E, separately, spelled one after the other, mean nothing as separate letters. It is their association and the order of their sequence which release significance. He also discusses other examples, like, for example, whether it's worth it teaching a child how to read by spelling every single letter one by one, or whether it is a better alternative to teach them how to conceive different patterns of words, like groups of words together, and to recognize them in words, so that they can have a more kind of pattern-oriented perception of the meaning of those words, like we have here with this example of love. So it is, I guess, a mental assumption. How do you want to use your brain? In what way do you want to apply the perception? Like using a microscopic vision or a telescopic vision, from the whole to the parts, or from the parts to the whole. And as far as I understand it, then Rudhyar is not categorically saying don't use the parts separately or don't look at individual aspects or items in the chart, just the contrary. But there is a condition there to start from the whole, and then presumably we can be revealed a different picture of the individual parts by doing that first. So from there come the idea of planetary patterns. And once we talked about this a little bit in one of our discussions on Thursdays, many months ago, I think now. And we only, mentioned them very quickly, not even going through all of those different categories. But the pioneer in seeing patterns in the chart, different arrangements of planets, is Mark Edmund Jones. Then Rudhyar then took from this concept and reinterpreted them, gave them some other names, and just kind of polished them around the edges a little bit, without again contradicting Mark Jones necessarily. But he said he did I mean, according to Rudhyar, Mark Jones did one of the most important contributions to astrology by proposing that way of working, looking at the chart and recognizing those different arrangements. So I don't know if you have checked yours, whether you know which one it is and whether you use it with clients. But in his book, the let me see, I have it here, the Guide to Horoscope Interpretation. I've got it at the end as well as recommended books. Mark Jones goes through them, and these are the 7 categories that he gives as different chart patterns that we can find: the splash, the bundle, the locomotive, the ball, bucket, seesaw, and splay. So Rudhyar doesn't completely agree this is like extremely relevant in any case, and he adds a little bit more to it. But in his classification, which you can find in the Person-Centered Astrology book, is the hemispheric, the funnel, the tripod, the cluster, the open angle, the fourfold, and the non-harmonic. Have you used them? What do you think about this? How familiar are you with the patterns?
I've looked at patterns quite a bit. I have a classic bowl, which is one of the reasons why I got interested in patterns in the first place. All of my planets are located above the horizon, between the 7th and the 10th and the 12th house. So yeah, that's what got me going. So typically when I look at a chart, that's one of the first things I look for is there some classic pattern there in the chart as a whole?
Yes.
Because that can give you it can give you a nice underlying theme energetically of the individual.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
when you start breaking down the pieces, then it's like a jigsaw puzzle where that's what this piece looks like, and that's what this piece looks like. But until you put them all together and you see that, you don't really get a good appreciation of it. And that's just using the 10 planets, not angles, not nodes, not anything else.
Yes, just the bodies that we use to, to have as players in the chart. Maybe we can look at it together now a little bit and see what these, say the classification of Rudhyar, what these are a little bit, just basically.
Rudhyar,
Yes.
I wanted to ask if you're saying on the one side, here I can if on the one side you've got the splash, you're saying in this thing that's equal to the hemispheric,
No,
and the
yeah,
is
good
equal
question.
to non-harmonic?
No, there is no correspondence at all. Maybe some of them will do, but I listed them in the order that each one of them, Mark Jones and Rudhyar, list them in their books. But they don't. So, for example, Rudhyar is not saying the splash one needs to be called hemispheric. They very often are different here. So I will disregard for a moment the classification by Mark Jones. And I will go to Rudhyar's because let's just see what he proposes. And there is a seesaw in Rudhyar's one as well. I haven't mentioned it here, but maybe we can say, I don't know. No, it's not in the fourfold. Rudhyar also speaks of a seesaw pattern out of this first list here. But he adds other names. And for example, the ball and the bucket are very similar to the cluster and the funnel. So the bucket, sometimes they say a bucket with a handle. And this is what the funnel is, according to Rudhyar. But he uses this other analogy with something else, with another shape, to explain a situation where we have in the chart all the planets, like a cluster on one side of the chart within several houses, a pretty small area, covering a pretty small area of the chart. And then only one single planet is on the other side. It doesn't matter which hemisphere of the chart we're talking about. The pattern is, these are visual patterns. So we have a bunch of things together, like 9 out of 10 planets on one side and very close together, and then only one is as a juxtaposition on the other opposite side. And the more this other planet is around the middle of the cluster on the opposite side, the more important it is. So this is a singleton planet. It is called a singleton. I have it in my chart, for example. I have a singleton Jupiter, just opposite all of the other planets, which are stuck together pretty much in one place. And according to Rudhyar, this is a rather, not very often seen pattern. It is statistically, he says, not very often seen, but he finds it quite interesting because then this planet becomes the expression, the external outlet of the energies accumulated and gathered around the cluster. So you're using, say, all the planets in all the 9 planets together to come up with a direction, with an impulse, but then it's like a very thin straw of external kind of expression comes out from the singleton planet. And yes, of course, it is important which houses are involved here, because in my case, for example, the Jupiter singleton happens to be over the horizon on the, say, more social side of the chart, the late houses, it's in the 12th house, while all the other planets are more underneath. Not all of them, but the majority of them are underneath the horizon in the 6th house. So this is something to be factored in as well. Not only the shape that is being created, but also where the experience is coming from. So in my chart, it is supposed to be something like a starting from internal experiences, say knowledge, or some sort of experience that you go through that comes as a source of certain conclusions, and then these need to be well, they end up being expressed through the Jupiter in the upside, the horizon side of the chart in one way or another. At least this is what is naturally supposed to be the case. You know that the chart doesn't presuppose this, that it's only a recommendation in a way, but this could be a signal, and we can give it as an advice to the client, for example, that this particular planet is going to be a very powerful tool to use and to explore. What else can we look at? The hemispheric one is very similar, but that's where all the planets are on one hemisphere of the chart, either the bottom or the top, the east or the west. And then there is nothing else to balance it on the other side. So everything is stuck together, but kind of spread around the area of one hemisphere of the chart. Then we have the cluster, which is very similar. And that's also everything stuck together, but in a very much more constrained space. I think the conditions was only 4 houses, if I'm not mistaken. But again, here, there is no point arguing what's exactly the rule, because the rules are not 100% set. Rudhyar is saying that don't get too bogged down into exactly following the rule that currently we have come up with, because the most important thing is to recognize the patterns and to teach ourselves to see the patterns. And the seesaw is an opposition around which in the chart a lot of things are centered. So you have, say, a major opposition between, I don't know, for example, Jupiter and Mars. And then there are a bunch of planets around the Jupiter, several around the Mars. Maybe there is an exception of 1 or 2 planets somewhere else, not that visibly connected to the pattern, but mostly this is where everything is revolving around, the 2 opposite sides. And we can see that in such cases, the person is dealing with duality, they're dealing with contrast, and with trying to make 2 forces work together and 2 sides, 2 experiences more or less, where the center of the opposition, those 2 houses where they fall. What else? Have you seen, what charts do you have? Do you have any interesting patterns going on in your charts like that? Any of those? Any examples? Yes, Belina. You have to unmute yourself. Yes.
Am I
we
okay
can-
now? Am
Yes,
I okay now?
you are. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
There is a question which really torture my conscience. Yesterday night, I have a customer. All of the planets are situated, maybe hemispherically, because they start from the first and finish on the sixth house. This line started with the sun and finished with Neptune. I had the feeling at the first sign when I saw the chart that all of these planets are 30 degrees apart. I never saw such a thing. I had the feeling that this is one great football team. I had the feeling that all of the planets play together. I mean, they help each other because the three network of energy going one to another. And the second thing which impressed me, nothing in the upper hemisphere, nothing above the horizon, only south, not in the around midheaven. Only
That's interesting.
not north, but south.
Right. Right.
So I believe the topic about the different forms is extremely important because this is something which we need to catch from the first look of the chart. I believe that this is the form of the big picture which we can start to draw for our client.
Mhm.
So to start from there. And also what I pay attention, I told you that almost every planet is 30 degrees apart from each other. I pay attention that the degree is 13 degrees. So we have 5 planets on 13 degrees at 30 degrees each other, which also has some meaning.
That has a great meaning, actually. Yes.
Yeah,
This is such an interesting
so
example.
I like to share with you, but the feeling when I saw this without any definition from the book, I had the feeling that all of these planets are really very, very good team, which play together. And I didn't see any outer expression. What
Right.
would you say? And it's important, the third important thing is that the sun, it's almost will cross the horizon.
Okay.
And again, we finish all of this chain with Neptune. So all of these basic facts, they talking about this soul journey. It's
Very much so. So let's think about your example a little bit. That's a great example because we later on I will touch on how fundamental the 30-degree steps are when we speak about aspects and in general the overall rhythm of an unfoldment of everything is revolving around in astrology these 30-degree sections of space or time because we have the 360-degree circle of the zodiac, and then we divide it by, when we divide it by 12, and the fundamental number 12 comes from the 12 lunations during the year. Probably, that's what Rudhyar also suggests. When we combine the two factors, we then see how it makes sense to split the circle into 30-degree intervals. And I think he mentions in one of the other books somewhere that it's extremely rare to find a person's chart where more than like 3 planets, and in your case you said 5, are making those semi-sextiles, the 30-degree aspects. And especially, I mean, when you were describing that chart, what comes to my mind, and this is just a very spontaneous interpretation, is that if only the South Node is over the horizon, and everything else is undone, and the sun is just about to set, on the descendant. And all this interconnectedness, which is very obvious between the players. Maybe we have somebody here. This is more from evolutionary astrology perspective, because I do use the nodes a lot. I take them into account almost as another starting point pretty much starting from two things, looking at for patterns, like what we're discussing here, at the same time looking at where the nodes are in the chart. So that I'm giving a bit of a clue, given a clue, where is this person coming from? What is conditioning the present lifetime and the present chart, and where they're going towards? And this south node on over the horizon, we can probably suppose that this is somebody that has overdone in the past external living, public life, and involvement in outside participation, and maybe something either went wrong there or wasn't. I don't think it's a case of not being completed, because if it was a case of having to go back to it and complete it and repeat it, then we would have had planets over the horizon or something going on around the south node. But here it is almost like a complete direct message: distance yourself from public life temporarily in this lifetime, because you need to be, I was like going in the path of the hermits. The hermit from the tarot, comes to my mind. Be alone for a while, or be concentrated in your personal world, in your personal, journey, transformation, work, whatever it is, maybe family, I don't know, but everything personal, so that you can discover some proofs there for yourself or contribute something there, rather than constantly being pulled out. And I don't know. Do you when you spoke to the person and when you know the story, do you think that's the case?
First of all, the south node is in Pisces in the 10th house, which means that in the past, maybe this soul has a very rich spiritual experience of somebody in power regarding spiritual position.
Exactly.
But what actually puzzled me is that the person has the north node in 4th house in Virgo, which is a little bit, it was difficult for me to get the universal plan at the first. But the person has trine between Moon and Neptune in fire signs. So also the person has another trine between Sun and Uranus. Too many talents or too many rewards from the past, or too many credits, let's say like that.
Yes.
The person feel, she's a woman, that she very much like to do and work like energy healer. That's what she wants. From the other hand, her past experience, she worked in some different fabrics. She came from Bulgaria and she do the same job almost in the fabric, something like that.
Yeah, in a factory, you mean? Yes, yes.
In factory, I'm sorry. From the other hand, I study very deep numerology, because I believe that astrology and numerology are a sister which complete each other. They can make excellent integration. And pay attention, this person was born at 8th of July. I like to point number 8. Number 8, it's very fortunate date. Okay, and her life path number, it's 22. So everything
Everything comes together in a way.
very unique soul, yeah.
Yes.
And you will find the patterns in the same time when you're looking the chart.
Yeah, absolutely.
So definitely she is very confused what to do, because she feels that she's so full. So she feels that she has many options and many choices. If this answers your question.
Right, right. Yes. Well, obviously, we need to see the chart to be more. I just was thinking from your example, because I found it very interesting, of the arrangement of things and everything.
First time I see.
It's a very, very interesting how we. Sometimes notice these things, and they can save us so much time and orienting into the major thing around because the rest of the planet's positions individually can give us the details and give us how the story is unfolding. But obviously here we have a question of somebody maybe put in a position in the current lifetime where they need to sacrifice opportunities to participate more actively out there in the world because it's simply not their job to do that this time around. There was something to be overcome or to be balanced out on the other side of the story. And when we have those charts, which are hemispheric or with a funnel or with a cluster, these charts usually tell me that there is something extremely specific that this person is supposed to work on and demonstrate in this particular lifetime. Maybe they'll be very limited in other directions. It is not a spread out chart. Like, for example, display in Mark Jones, classifications is very, and the splash and display, they're very similar. Some people can hardly distinguish them. And Rudhyar is even saying that display may not even exist because it requires this exact harmony, very geometrical exactness of the planets forming a star pattern in the chart, where everything is equally from one another, which is a very, very rare thing. He himself said he never saw that in reality after so many years of practice. But let's see the splash, for example. The splash is an example of those charts that are kind of spread all over the place in a way. And we have different experiences from different areas of life, different signs of the zodiac are giving different temperamental expressions too. So it's all very individual. But it's looking at the chart as a whole picture really shows us this signature that Rudhyar is talking about, how the chart is our signature, is our very individual mandala and pattern. The circular shape makes it very easy to associate with the mandala, isn't it? And to see how that's sending a message beyond the individual meanings. And let's see, well, actually, yeah, I will move on a little bit because eventually we'll come back to the same chart of Sigmund Freud to demonstrate that in reality. I mean, like an example. But here, there is the other key word that Rudhyar is stressing in this, step that he's talking about. We need not just to be aware of forms and patterns, but also of the idea of accent or accentuation. And accents, the way I think is maybe easiest to imagine this, is connected to this idea of rulership and exaltation, how certain planets are claimed to be stronger or weaker when they fall in particular signs of the zodiac or particular houses, even though this is quite questionable, because the different astrologers and traditions and schools, techniques have a different opinion about how to really work with rulership. We had a discussion on this. I think we went through some of the questions there. For example, whether we can assign rulership to the outer planets and whether we should do that because they are of a different category, of a different kind of mode of operation altogether, or to stick with just up to Saturn and give every planet a bigger or a stronger kind of accent in the chart. For example, Venus in Libra is supposed to be an accentuated function, one that is predominating in a way that the person is reaching out for and using more actively than, say, another planet that is still there, that is still a very important function in them, that cannot be disregarded. But say if the, I don't know what to give you as an example, say Jupiter in Virgo, or I don't know, anything that could be regarded. Mars in Libra, for example. I have Mars in Libra in my chart. And so does Sigmund Freud with this Mars in Libra, which I will jump quickly here to, because I'm tempted to give you this as an example. This is what Rudhyar uses in the book too, but there is a different ascendant there. You may get a bit confused if you read the book, because he uses him as an example and still the example is valid. But I don't know, maybe at the time when Rudhyar was working, the real time of birth of Sigmund Freud was not known or wasn't available. So he's using Cancer ascendant, but still the shape of the chart is the same. It's just the distribution of the houses is different. And this Mars in Libra retrogrades, how unusual it is as well to have retrograde Mars in the chart, is standing out. And if we're not taking into account form and accent, the accents are actually recurring because planets revolve around the sun and they periodically come to the same positions where they were before a certain period of time, each one in its own speed, which means that if today Venus is receiving an accent because it's located in one of the signs that it rules, then after a certain time, this situation will repeat itself. So here we've got on the first glance, very weak Mars, weak in inverted commas, in Libra, in the sign of its fall, and retrograde. So somebody may think that this part is not a big factor in that chart, but actually, the reason it is a big factor is that it's the singleton, that it's the only one opposite the whole bunch of other planets here. And it is receiving the outer expression of all the pressure that is accumulating here. So studying Freud's work and knowing, I mean, he's such a well-known figure, probably not very well understood, but this accent that he's making on sexuality in his work and on the factor of that in human psychology, isn't that the ideal expression of that Mars in the 11th house? And obviously in the 11th house makes a lot more sense than in the other chart where it was falling in the 4th. But here we can see the pattern exteriorated. And that's could be quite an obsession. When you have a singleton, it could be an obsession. You can't escape from the function of that planet. Everything gets filtered through it. Have you seen, have you observed clients' charts with singletons like that? The buckle with handle, or the funnel, as Rudhyar is calling it? How do you see it? I just want to mix up conversation during the time, so it's a bit more interactive this time and not leave it until the end. Yes, James.
I think
Well, yeah, I've seen charts like that. And yeah, it's what you call the singleton. I've never really thought of that as being necessarily being a singleton. But it is in this case the only planet in the Eastern Hemisphere. And so that tends to want to function more independently. I also have Mars in Libra, so I am a little bit familiar with that, though mine is direct, not retrograde. And yeah, the one transit that I tend to be most aware of is anytime Mars goes through Aries or Libra. And because, yeah, it's contained or constrained, but then transits and other factors can cause it to release. And unfortunately, sometimes that release comes in a rather explosive way.
Exactly.
And so where this is literally the handle of the bucket or the basket, yeah, all that energy is coming out that way. That's the outlet for the other 9 planets, and which can make it more challenging, though, because it is in the southern hemisphere. That does help because, and in the 11th house, it can best be expressed through groups, organizations, and into the outer world, rather than contained within the self, because it's not in a northern hemisphere.
And maybe that's one of the reasons that people outside, like those that didn't know Freud personally, but were more recipients of his work or his public persona, this is what they saw, or maybe that's what they pointed their attention to, because that was the most visible factor. Often singletons become the most visible factor I think this depends on where they are by house. Like here, this is logical because, as you said, it's the 11th house, and pretty much everything else is concentrated around one-to-one interaction. And I'm not, 100% sure about, exactly the details of Freud's situation, but I think he's very well known as first of all, a therapist that through the work with people that came to, do psychological work with him and therapy with him, he was able to draw out of that some sort of conclusions, and then he converted into academic concepts, very similar to Jung's situation. But it doesn't matter that the conclusions were different. Jung also has this chart with Sun in the 7th house, and many things around the descendant, showing a very genuine interest towards working with other people one-to-one and investigating how the psyche works, and then expressing that externally through something. And we see here that this Mars was maybe the tool that Freud used most actively to do that. But it was a little bit kind of looking for problems, looking for pathology, let's say, in a way. It's a retrograde Mars, and it's Mars in Libra. So maybe out of he himself feeling a little bit of some sort of inadequacy, we can just suppose that, we never know, in the Martian expression, he was able to generalize that and apply it to a wider, sphere of, what could be given as conclusions for everybody and anybody to use.
Radalina, I think I have that. I think I have that pattern.
Mm-hmm.
I have all of them. I have almost all the planets at the top in opposition, and one planet squares all of them both ways, and that's Pluto squares all of them.
Yes, I remember we once looked at your chart, and it was very, Pluto was standing out in one way or another. It was separated. I remember that it was very separated. And yeah, you can check. I don't know if you guys are using Solar Fire or any other software, but one thing I really like in Solar Fire is that using Mark Jones's classifications, because obviously they were the ones that got more widely accepted for some reason, it can give you directly, with the reports for the chart, it is showing you which pattern it is, because sometimes it's not very clear. Sometimes it's between two different patterns and so on. But again, let's not be too fussed about exactly, the name, the classification, but look for something interesting in general that we can notice in the overall arrangement, in the overall picture of the chart. And this Mars here is playing the role of this red dot on the green background that Rudhyar is talking about. This standing out factor, that if Mars in the chart was located again in Libra, again retrograde, but part of another configuration with the rest of the planets, the meaning would have been completely different, and it wouldn't have received the accent that it's receiving in this particular case. So this is a perfect example. I decided to use the same example as he gave because it is a planet which, by all normal definitions, is supposed to be weak, becomes the strongest when we look at it this way. So I'll go one step back very quickly to finish that idea about accent. That accent is like, it's very, I think, adequate to think of the body again, and the health, and not just health in general, but the different functions of the body as a comparison to the different functions in the psyche that recur, and they're not all used at the same time simultaneously. We all have our personal planets. They all correspond to something crucial that is not, something to be avoided in any case. But every now and then we have one function taking the stage and being accentuated, being concentrated. In a similar way, like in the body, we have different processes. Like if we are, for example, eating at the moment, we're having concentration on the digestion. And while this is doing its thing, it is not, it's possible, but it's not wise to start learning something or reading something at the same time, because these two clash together. The energy is not able to kind of be distributed evenly when one function is supposed to do its job and then it's finishing, another one takes the stage, and so on. Something very similar happens with the planets. This is more related to transits and progressions, like when over time, when you receive different transits, so when your chart transforms the journey and kind of shows the process of individuation over time through the progressions. You can see how now Venus is on the center stage. Then after some time, something else, maybe the progress moon, or and this is showing us a rhythm going on. And this rhythm over time with the charts and progressions, we have to observe it over time in order to realize what's really going on and how these things recur. And they can then bring us an idea of what can come back that has already happened in another form, yes, but very similar as a pattern in the past. So here Rudhyar is saying there are accents in emptiness as well as in fullness, in critical change. For instance, the sixth house, as well as in positive self-assertion, first or 10th house. So this is just a reminder that an accent could be something not being there, as well as something being there in the chart. So if you have nothing in a house, or nothing in, okay, not in a single house, because that may be too little to make big conclusions of, but there are those charts where, for example, you have a lot going on in 2/3 of the chart, but 1/3 of the chart is empty. So now maybe we can argue that this empty 1/3 of the chart is more important, or something critical is going to happen there, maybe not externally, maybe more internally, but it will be a factor. Then those other sections where there are planets and there were things happening. So sensitive areas could be those that are not fulfilled in this moment. And for example, on the other hand, having a lot going on in the sixth house, like I do, I think one option is that something in the life is critically missing. And this critical missing of something could become the source of great action and great change, but it all starts from the emptiness. So you could be deprived of something. Maybe something similar could be seen in the 12th house if there is a big concentration of planets in the 12th, or maybe also in the 8th. We can argue here, it's not set, but the 6th house is famous of being connected to problems related to your personal development in one way or another, some challenges to be overcome in the immediate environment, and then something to be learned out of that. Yeah, I think that's important. But the stress also, to finish with this, the stress on something, emptiness or fullness, at the end of the day, is only potential. So what the chart is giving us is indications. If somebody has, Rudhyar says, the sun in Leo, this by no means means that the sun will express itself in the Leonine way that we expect from it. Maybe it won't. Maybe something will block it, or maybe something will simply not be consciously realized by the person, even though it exists there in the first place as potential. So the best we can do is to point to the potential, but we don't necessarily have a guarantee that this is going to be the accent at the end of the day. Yeah? Okay, well, from here, we're moving on to the next step, and I suggest we make a quick break. So you can, have something to drink if you want, or just pause for a while and stop staring for 10 minutes at the screen, and then we'll be back together in a short while. Moving on to step 8, which in the book is a dynamic understanding of planetary cycles and aspects. It says in humanistic astrology, one should approach aspects in a birth chart in a manner different from that required for the study of transits and progressions. The reason for this, of course, is that a birth chart represents an archetypal form, a space factor, while transits and progressions deal with time sequences. And I know that this is quite hard for everyone to grasp, and very, very, rarely are we making a distinction between these two kinds of aspects. So on the one hand, we have the aspects in the birth chart. The birth chart is fixed. we always have the same birth chart, don't we? It is the snapshot of the positions of all the planetary bodies and other factors that we decide to use at the moment of birth. And it is what it is. It never changes. Yes, it does, transform itself, evolve, change over time. But what it changes, the adjustment is the progressions in the transits, especially the progressions. But the actual birth chart is a potential, as a signature, as a map, whatever you want to call it, stays the same. And if you have an aspect in your birth chart, like, for example, Mars opposite Jupiter, say, then this is to be interpreted as, first of all, where were the two planets in their relationship to each other at the moment of your birth? And then this becomes a constant interaction style between these two functions in you. And this is going to be like the default setting. The aspect is giving us an idea of that default setting that is stationary, and it's part of the so-called spatial factor of the chart. The chart is spatial because it is a 2D model, fixed in space. But then when we look at the ephemeris, following the movements of the planets over time, day by day, we can also, every now and then now, see an opposition between Mars and Jupiter in the sky, like out there in the universe, as a background factor. And when we ask somebody, Rudhyar is saying, he's giving a different example as which planets are involved in the aspect, but the idea is the same, is if you're being asked to give an interpretation, what does it mean to have Mars opposite Jupiter? Then the wise thing to do and the wise way to think about this is to say, I don't know, because I don't have the chart in front of me. I don't know in what other configurations and scenario in general are these two planets involved. Yes, okay, they are opposite one another, but they are all players in we can say, in a film or in a theatrical performance. And they are all interconnected in that way, those planets, all 10 of them. And if we only signal out the relationship between Mars and Jupiter, we're having a very, very, inaccurate story there. Taken out of context, potentially extremely misleading. But we are tempted to analyze this as an opposition in general, equating that to an opposition between Mars and Jupiter at any possible moment that is unfolding, say, at this time. But it's not, because that was part of somebody's overall arrangement there. Now, in the ephemeris and in the transits and progressions, in the transits actually more often than not, because Jupiter is not a very big factor in progressions, but Jupiter opposite Mars periodically happening in their cycle relationship between the two planets could be interpreted. Like if we asked, what is Mars up in Scorpio opposite Jupiter in Taurus supposed to mean? Then we can think about that, and we can say, what these two qualities of the signs, when they are in this relationship of tense opposition and juxtaposition, could produce as an energy dynamic. That is reasonable to discuss, isn't it? So it is something that's worth thinking about. Yeah, that these are two different modes of operation in the chart, which is fixed, and in the time sequences of the transits that again say to us, now the relationship between Mars and Jupiter is accentuated because they are in the culmination of their relationship. In other words, the opposition. The opposition is the middle of the cycle of relationship between two planets, say, when they have reached, the point where what these two functions in us are in the situation currently are supposed to bring us a message, is getting clear, the good and the bad of it. It is a very clarifying stage of relationship, the opposition. And later I will mention more about this, so it's more understandable. Now, here we're starting to get to the point. of aspects, little by little. I know it's probably going to be again too much to grasp in one go, but at the end I've got some books to recommend, especially the astrological aspects by Rudhyar and his, the last wife he had that cooperated with him in this project, Leila. So the book by the two of them, Astrological Aspects, a process-oriented approach, is really based on everything that we're going to touch on from now on, specifically on aspects. And the key message here is that we are using the lunation cycle as a prototype of all the aspects, formation, and seeing them as different stages in the journey between the meeting of two bodies, two factors, two planets, and their next meeting. So this has an equivalent of looking at the sun and the moon as the lights, the two major factors in the birth chart, and their relationship over time is called the lunation cycle, where we have recurring phases starting from a new moon, which we can say is point zero, the beginning of a cycle of relationship, then goes through different steps, some of them more critical than others, and each one of those steps is a journey, like a step in a journey where something particular is supposed to happen. And that automatically means that all of those aspects mean something very different from one another. Now here you can see an illustration. This is the lunation cycle starting from new moon here at the top, and then you're going left, like from here, and counterclockwise we go through the different phases: the crescent moon, the first quarter, gibbous, then the full moon, the disseminating, the last quarter, and the balsamic. So these 8 phases of the moon are to be related to the gradual formation of aspects between planets, these different angles. Yes, they are angular, they are geometric as well, but only thinking in terms of geometry and angles is again going to be very limiting in exactly the same way as looking at the chart as a list of individual things that are making, all sorts of relationship to each other is limiting compared to looking for patterns. Here we can see that something is unfolding at a still very unclear beginning in the new moon. And then from the new moon to the full moon, it is experiencing a very active, out there in the world participation and gradual unfoldment of its potential as an individual impulse. And this has its correspondence to the different stages of a human life, where we have from the beginning up to about age 42, which is also the Uranus opposition, or the midlife, because we can assume that nowadays we can use the Uranus cycle of 84 years as a sort of framework to say, yes, a human life is very likely to last until 84. So let's use that as a, as a form to base everything on. The middle of that is 42. So 42 is something like a full moon stage. And if we think about it, what happens around that age, the crisis that we all experience, is a crisis of realizing what we have been going through up to that point, what was the success of it, and what was the, the things that we're not that satisfied with, or the sense of failure. There may have been one or the other or both. And usually the midlife crisis is triggered by this realization that the full moon symbolizes. For the first time, we can see the picture clearly. For the first time in the lunar month, when we have the full moon, we can see the full moon. We can actually perceive it because it's entirely lit by the sun. All of those things are, when we think of them, they are symbolically the same. And this is, if you look at the chart in that way, First of all, let's see the static chart. And then we can talk about the transits as well. But in the static chart, if you study it by maybe making a list for yourself, not only what aspects are predominant, like how many squares, how many positions, so on, but also what exactly is going on between each pair of planets. So let's say you start with the personal planets and you register. What's the relationship between the sun and the moon for that person? Say they were born on a full moon. So we make a note. Here we've got a culmination of relationship between the two. And anything that we can make as conclusions out of this. Of course, we need to study the different phases. And today we are not going to have time to really go deep into the meaning of the phases. But if you split the whole process into hemicycles, let's say, hemispheres, one between the new moon and the full moon, and then the second one between the full moon and the next new moon, something very interesting as a pattern comes out, which could be used for every case. In every case, if we find the two planets in the first half of their relationship cycle, then we are expecting something there, more action, more development, more personality, more outgoing activity, maybe a little bit more of a fight against the world and assertion of one's will, learning how to survive, learning how to apply somebody's, say, potential skills. And it's all about action, basically. Then, when we cross the line from full moon to the second part of the cycle, then there is a shift of emphasis. Something else is now going to be the point. And this is consciousness or the mind. So we are shifting from physical action to mental activity and to now realizing what were the lessons out of the action or what were the results, the practical things that we managed to build for ourselves. Because we're building personality in the first half, but we are releasing that personality, or we are sharing with the world, or we are being some sort of exemplar or contributor or a group player. There may be many different things, and actually in the different steps, in the different aspects that things make between full moon and the next new moon, we see different expressions of that can be more specific. So you can use this diagram here to see roughly what is going on at every stage. So say we take as an example Saturn and Jupiter in the birth chart. We recently had a conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius, in the very first 0 degree of Aquarius. That's some sort of symbolically really what a conjunction is all about, isn't it? A new beginning. Here, not only between the two planets that had their meeting regularly every 20 years, and now this year we had in January the first step in the next 20-year cycle between them. And it was also in a place in the zodiac, which we can also assume is some sort of a new beginning point, because it's the very beginning of the sign Aquarius. But that's another story. So if you stick with me, we can try to go step by step, just very briefly, and see what we can expect happening. We know that Jupiter and Saturn are social planets. The changes that they bring with every next cycle of relationship between them are related to our contribution or in participation in the society that we happen to be living in the existing society, and all the things that are preset there as relationships, institutions, government, let's say, everything that you can think about, culturally as well. So when Jupiter meets Saturn, we have a participation in a mystical union, like the moon meeting the sun every month, once every month. And if you think about it, it's always in another sign, never in the same. So every new moon happens in another sign. So what the sun gives as an impulse to the moon to then spread out and develop, like the moon is the emissary, is from another starting point. And with Jupiter and Saturn, Saturn is the sun and Jupiter is the moon. Why? Because Saturn is slower. Saturn will pretty much stay in the same position or very close to this. It's not going to stay in the same position because it's also moving forward, but it will move forward slower than Jupiter. Jupiter is going to come, conjunct Saturn, and then move forward. And this is now going to be a revelation of their mutual relationship step by step. As we go along, Jupiter will separate and will make the first major aspect that we are observing. The first step is 30 degrees from the beginning, which is semi-sextile. And this is somewhere here in the wheel, like between this new moon of emergence, birth, projection, beginning, new incarnation, and the next one, the crescent, which is the beginning of the exterioration of that, the struggle of showing this new thing out in the world, making it real in one way or another, exposing it. So 30 degrees, the first impulse of revelation. Then we have the sextile at 60 degrees, which more or less corresponds to the crescent moon. We can split the wheel into more or less aspects. So at the moment, I'm only talking about the major ones that we are all familiar with. The sextiles, the trines, the squares, the oppositions. And the quincunx as well will be added here, because if we think about it, if we go step by step, 30 degrees at a time, we're going to have 30 semi-sextile, 60 sextile, 90 square, 120 trine, but then 150, which is quincunx. And the quincunx is very often disregarded, but it's a crucial aspect as well in that sequence. And then we have the opposition at 180. So all of these are steps of 30 degrees. In the next slide, you're going to see more how that works. And when we get to the first square at 90 degrees, we have a crisis point. So in the whole cycle, of which the lunation is a prototype, we have 4 crucial points, which are more important, let's say, in a way, or okay, more important is not correct. It's rather the whole action that is always the same action that is trying to assert itself and to, the same thing that was born is growing up. But in those 4 points, it's got, again, an accent going on. Something is either turning direction or is meeting a challenge, and it is a decisive point. The first square is one of those decisive points. But because the first square, what we call the first quarter moon, is belonging to the first part of the cycle, it has a completely different meaning from the one that we'll see on the second half of the cycle. So Jupiter and Saturn conjuncting in Aquarius will have their first square at some point, where they would be in 2 signs of the zodiac. I haven't really checked where the actual ones will be, but for example, they can be square in, say, Gemini and Virgo, say, or Taurus and Leo. They would be square in 2 signs of the zodiac that are making this, standard 90-degree aspect to one another. But that would be the beginning. So if the starting point is, say, Taurus, then the first square will be Leo. It won't be Aquarius, if that makes sense. Because Leo, in the sequence of the zodiac, is the very first time, the very first 90-degree section between Taurus and, in this case, Leo. Then when we get to Aquarius, it's a square again, but that square is a different kind of square. It's no longer about action, it's about realization of kind of change of strategy or change of, how do we want to use the accumulated wisdom and knowledge or resources that we have gathered in the first half of the cycle. So that distinction that we need to make between first square and second square, and every square you have in the chart belongs to one of those two positions in the cycle. It is very important to note what it is, because then the meaning will be different. Then we have here in the first half action, expression, crisis of action. While in the second half, the last quarter moon, it's revision, reorientation, integration. And this is a crisis of consciousness and not of action. So you can see that when you are 21 years old, you're not going through the same stage of your life as when you are 50 something. And these are the two squares pretty much when they happen, when we, correspond to stages of life. You know that using the Saturn cycle, we can divide a lifetime into those 7-year steps and get to the same 7 by 12 is 84. So we're using the 84-year cycle of Uranus as a, the whole. Our whole is this. And then first half to 42, second half from 42 to 84. But then everything can be split into 7-year steps. And if you think about that, what happens in life, the major lessons, the major challenges in those 7-year ages very much correspond to the meaning of the aspects that come in those steps as well. So the semi-sextile is related to age 7, the sextile to age 14. Then the first square is the beginning of the 20s. The after the first square, we've got a trine around the 30s. Then 37, 36, 37. It's a crucial point, the quincunx, where something is being cleaned or decided or reformed a little bit. It's a preparation stage for the opposition. And if we think of the opposition as some sort of relationship, a full relationship of one completed personality with another completed personality, which could happen maybe for the first time, we can argue, when somebody reaches mid-age, then the final preparation for that, cleaning the debris, let's say, of what is not needed, making yourself potentially a good partner, if we can think of it this way, happens at the quincunx stage. And this is when we think of it in another way, in another comparison, to see how all the layers are joining together, the zodiac. In the zodiac, this step that the quincunx here in the middle between the gibbous moon and the full moon is very much like Virgo or the 6th house. So we have 6 steps, 6 signs of the zodiac, 6 houses, and then on the 7th step, we are at the full moon, right in the middle. And then Rudhyar talks a little bit also about the idea of every cycle having a beginning, a middle, and an end. Another thing which is not always realized, that not just the beginning and the end are important, but what's really the culmination of the relationship between forces is the middle point. And that's where taking into account midpoints in the chart or in anywhere comes from. The very charged opposition point or middle point between two things, where really they reach the maximum of their potential of action. So whatever was born at the new moon had the opportunity to try its strength and its ability in the first half of the cycle. In the second half of the cycle, it needs to see where that led to and to start a process of letting go. So now I would like to actually, maybe before we touch on this, which is pretty much the final slide, but around which everything that I told you so far revolves on, but we'll go through it again. Now looking at the different angles and the different ways that the wheel is split. I really love this graphic. So much that I think I probably will print it out in some sort of a, I don't know, some sort of a poster for my office or something, because that's the most beautiful, symmetrical, not just geometrically, but it really makes you see how the whole thing unfolds, and you know how the wheel can be split into different, very, very balanced angles. But before we do that, let's look at these two quotes from Rudhyar, because the final point before looking at first half of the cycle aspect, second half of the cycle aspects, which you can read about, by the way, in the Astrological Aspects book. Leo is going through each one of them separately, and it's beautiful because it reveals so much more layers of meaning than you can find, you know, in any other approach. So before that, good aspects and bad aspects. I'm so tired of repeating to my, say, clients, friends, people that are not that much into astrology, but know a little bit of it and are curious and want to, you know, have something being told about their chart, that there is nothing good and bad in astrology in general, that everything is what it's supposed to be. Everything is a necessary step in a process, in a cycle, or in, you know, say, a bigger picture. But here with good and bad aspects, this can be so tiring, doesn't it? I know most of you are astrologers, and you know that sometimes you need to explain. You have, yes, you have a square between Mars and Jupiter, for example, but that doesn't mean anything negative. This means that these two planets are showing a possibility of changing gear related to these two functions, of going in another direction, facing squarely, Rudhyar says, a challenge, and responding in a very unique, individual, creative way. The square is pushing us in this direction. It is creating an external challenge, usually. If we're talking about the first square, it is a physical one. It is somebody or something out there that we need to assert ourselves against. And this is not just quite unpleasant and disturbing, it is also an opportunity. It is something that can open the door to bringing us into a higher level. Obviously, we see that we cannot move on to the trine, which is considered to be, say, the most harmonious, the most, you know, expressing harmony, expressing understanding, being very productive in a very easygoing and smooth way, before having passed through the square first. We have to have passed the test of the square in order to reach the first trine and really have something to contribute in the trine. So looking at these two, first he's saying, we say that the disease cancer is an evil. And the statement is valid because cancer is neither normal nor necessary. But if we say that the breakdown into chemical substances of the food we eat is an evil process because it destroys the carrot or the calf liver into an amorphous pulp, or if we say that the replacement of worn out cells in our body by new ones is bad, such assertions have no valid meaning. Every phase of normal organic living, every function and process which is part of natural healthy living, psychologically or physiologically or psychologically, is to be welcomed. It is neither good nor bad. It simply is a necessary component of the activities of life or personality. So important this, isn't it? And how we can change our perspective towards astrology as a whole by realizing this. Yes, certain things are bugs in the system, like cancer, as he's saying here, that, you know, we are literally fighting against, but you cannot fight against your square or your opposition, because this is fighting against yourself, fighting against your normal development, your normal process. And it really doesn't make sense, does it? So here he says, under square phases of relationship, there may be much grinding of gears and uncoordinated haste or spasmodic fear generated between the two poles of the relationship. But to state the possibility of such negative results is not to describe the essential meaning of the square. It is to show how an inexperienced individual spirit or an immature social group may mishandle the special type of opportunity for growth represented by the square. And in another place, Rudhyar is saying that he has to be realistic and admit that in most cases, squares produce what seems to be a negative effect. But the reason for that is that maybe as a collective, as a species, as individual people, we are still at a stage when we are not, I don't know, let's say evolved enough or conscious enough to use the squares and the oppositions in a good way, in a productive way, and to really take advantage of them. But rather we are feeling frustrated by them because there is some sort of resistance. This resistance to change or resistance to transformation or to doing the necessary next step that you need to do in whatever you're doing, resisting growing up, maybe we can say. And when that happens, we're frustrating our own process and it pays back with some sort of negative, unpleasant, shocking, or, whatever you can imagine, event from outside that is only seeming to be, to be fought against. So yeah, that's again something that I wanted to not miss because I find it's quite important. Raven, you say you have to go. You're muted. We don't hear you. But I think we understand what you're saying. You have to go. We understand. No problem. It was good to see you. So there isn't that much left. Do you guys have any questions so far or any comments?
I have one question. If you can take that lunation picture here, let me take off my, if you take that, the lunation cycle, could it be put where you turn it around and at the ascendant you put the idea of the new moon for a person? Do you ever do that? Like or right at the horizon there at the ascendant would be this motion of if you could, I know it's for time sequences and relationships of planets, conjunctions and that time cycle, but could it also be on the birth chart that you would turn it and put that new moon at would be the ascendant place, or where would you do that as a archetype?
Okay, there are two things here. First of all, in order to use the lunation cycle as some sort of archetype for a process, we need to have two things relating to one another. We need to have something and another thing. So Sun and the Moon, Jupiter and Saturn, they need to be two players. So from that perspective, it doesn't make sense to use the ascendant like a something because it's just the ascendant. But if we want to juxtapose the lunation cycle stages to the zodiac, for example, or to the four angles of the chart in general as a concept, then what I would say would make more sense is for the new moon to be Capricorn or the MC. And the reason why I say that is because the transition between, this winter solstice moment, which is Capricorn, the beginning of that, is really what the planting of the seeds is. That's the cycle in the zodiac where seeds are being planted for new life to appear at a slightly later moment. So we don't see visibly the life emerging, sprouting out before the spring equinox and in Aries, where we have the perception for new beginning. And yes, we have concluded that this is going to be the starting point of the zodiac, the first sign and so on. But actually, what this is showing us here is that the new moon is a very similar, mystical, dark, where nothing can be seen. The moon cannot be seen during the new moon. something is brewing underneath the surface, which is still only a potential. And between, say, Capricorn and Aries, this is gradually kind of the seeds are trying to come out from the soil and to spring out. It makes a lot of sense to me for the first square, this action crisis, to be related to the ascendant and to Aries, because it's this, Aries to me is like the spirit that overcame the past and was able to emerge for new life out from the surface, like from the dark soil to the lightness of the day. But it was already there, it was already existing, but it was just planted, it was down hidden in the soil. With Aries, this is really coming out. And maybe if we think of the first square, that's such an opportunity. This corresponds to the beginning of the 20s, where the young person, for the first time, achieves maybe this independence of I'm a separate person now. I'm not conditioned by the past of my family, my background, my early family environment. I'm not only a subject of that, but now for the first time I can show individuality and start developing that individuality from this point onwards. And this to me is the ultimate symbol of, I have to go through a square. I have to go through a crisis to get born. The separation. A square is a bit of separation as well, like a rupture. You're no longer in the womb of the mother from Capricorn to Aries underneath the soil. You're already out there, and it's now dangerous. It's now you need to assert yourself. You need to show what you're capable of, and almost like the first square being this rite of passage of going towards maturity from childhood to gradually towards maturity. So, and the darkness of winter is really, I don't know, I hope you agree that it makes sense to be connected to the darkness of the moon up there. So, yeah, but yes, if we maybe we can play with this in another way, turning this whole wheel where in the chart where you have a conjunction. Like, for example, putting the point of the new moon where the conjunction is, let's say somewhere in the 8th house, it could be. And then you can see visually how step by step, when these two planets develop over time, their, how they stand to one another, how they would move through the houses, and each one of those houses will be the territory where, for example, the square is going to happen, then the opposition is going to happen, and it's becoming very interesting to observe. Did I manage to answer your question, Lauren?
Yes,
I have a
thank
question.
I kind of was taking that whole concept and it sparked what do you do? Could it relate? Of course it relates to the moment of birth.
Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Can I ask something?
I have a question, and I also posted it in the chat. Is that okay for me to go ahead and ask my question?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the chat box because I'm just not able to pay attention to everything, but sorry if I missed that.
No, that's okay.
Speak when you want to speak, you just, give us a sign like that.
Okay. So my question, well, I have a statement and a question to make. So, I mean, I think you, especially, well, I don't know. I think in general, there's a great deal of conflation between the significations or what is represented by, for instance, a planet versus a sign versus the houses versus the aspects, right? And I feel that, in my mind, for instance, I like to associate the zodiacal signs with adjectives versus, associating the planets with verbs, for instance. And of course, this is just, one approach to interpreting the natal chart, right? And so I guess I find that Dane Rudhyar, as his work, as brilliant as it is, and he's one of my favorite astrologers ever, he is not exempt from this sort of interpretive conflation that I've observed in the work of many astrologers. And so now my question, so in order to help clarify some of my concerns regarding his interpretive method regarding the use of aspects, could you illustrate the difference between I call it the aspectual cycle between, let's say, I like using the moon and Mercury because they're, you know, their significations are easy to, you know, represent. But could you, for instance, just give us a little, you know, a quick explanation of the differences between, for instance, a moon conjunct Mercury versus, you know, and well, versus, for instance, a square or an opposition or trine, just so that I could see your method of interpretation. You know what I mean? Like a quick.
Then this is coming in the next slide anyway. But to answer your question, I think one thing that's missing out here is that you weren't with us last time, I believe. We touched a lot. Last time the topic was exactly this distinction between houses, signs, and planets. And I personally don't know an astrologer that has stressed out the importance of distinguishing the meanings between these things more than Dane Rudhyar. He's almost scolding everybody else and I mean all the other approaches exactly because of that particular point, that we have the habit, which is not a very positive habit, most astrologers, to equate meanings of houses, signs, and other cycles that we can, for example, here, when we see the steps of the lunation, the whole reason I'm making those juxtapositions today with the aspects is so that people can imagine different associations that I think not very often, for example, somebody, it occurs to somebody that there is something in common, I mean, symbolically, here we're saying symbolically, between the quincunx aspect, for example, between the quincunx aspect and the sign Virgo and or the sixth step in the zodiac or the sixth house. Of course, they're not the same thing. This is one of the most important things to constantly mention and constantly go back to. And you're totally right. Yes, I wouldn't agree more. But it would be fair to, you know, to say that Dane Rudhyar was missing this point. Just the contrary. I think if anybody realizes how important that distinction is, I mean, professional astrologers, maybe that's thanks to taking a look at his work and his constant stress about this. So last time we looked at the graphics of how one is a spatial factor and the houses are about places where things happen, where...
Yes, circumstantial, yes. I've read his work. I'm not, I must say, just to interject, just so that my question is not misinterpreted, and so that way you don't have to expatiate on themes that may not be relevant, you know, to my question. What I'm saying is that, to be fair, I agree. I think Dane Rudhyar, he makes great attempts at trying to distinguish between a great deal of more factors and variables than I've ever seen any other astrologer do ever, you know, in their literary work. However, his wording still isn't exempt from, you know, if not purposefully, but unintentionally conflating certain themes. And I read a lot. I have several, but and I don't, well, I don't want to, that's not the point of my question though. I think the point of my, you know, that I can share with your debate later, but I think the point of my question is just, you know, for my own understanding, I would love for you to express, based on Rudhyar's work or your own interpretation, the difference between, you know, the aspectual phase of a moon conjunct Mercury versus, let's just say, a moon square Mercury, just for the sake of, you know, my own understanding.
The question is, as Rudhyar is pointing out, the most important question we need to ask is where, in the birth chart or in the transits? So which one?
In the birth chart.
In the birth chart or in the transit?
Yes, in the birth chart. This is what I'm curious to see. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a great example if we can maybe figure it out together. I haven't thought about like a story between Mercury and the moon, but this is very logical what we can come up with and could be a good illustration of this. So this is really this process-oriented approach and the different, so we look at it as phases. The formation of aspects is gradually coming up as those steps and phases that I already mentioned earlier a little bit, which in the book they call, I mean, these are just names, but there is like reasoning behind it, which you can research yourself. Involution and evolution. So the first 6 they classify as involutionary aspects, so belonging to activity that is very similar to what I described happens in the first hemicycle of relationship between 2 factors. And then the evolutionary ones are the second half that pretty much repeat the same angular aspects, but on the opposite side. It's almost like a mirror image. We can go a lot deeper into this, which we don't have time for, but probably one distinguished thing here to realize is why I'm sharing all this, is that those from the first half are not the same as those of the second half. Then everybody can go in their own personal time and investigate why and how and what exactly, for example, is the difference between the first square and the second square. That is, I think, more crucial than the difference between a trine and a square that most of us can probably figure out. But let's go through these together a little bit and see how this could be. We start from the waxing side, it's like the waxing side of the moon cycle. The moon cycle is just a prototype of 2 factors joining together, meeting, having a union, and then one has taken, the faster one has taken something from the slower one. We can imagine it as an idea, as an action, as some sort of, maybe they are on a mission. We can think of it this way. So you proposed a moon and Mercury. So the moon is obviously the faster factor of the 2. Mercury is slightly slower than that. So when Mercury and the moon meet, they will be together for a short while in the same place. That would be the conjunction. That would be the 0 degree. In this graphic, it's right in the bottom. So that's the starting point, the journey. And this first phase, the conjunction, they call it being. So something is simply, something new is there, is being born. Born like a potential. Then the moon will move forward because the moon is faster. So during this unfoldment, the moon will gradually move forward and it will reach the first major step between itself and Mercury, and they would stand at 30 degrees from one another. Then we would say they're making the first semi-square, which is a waxing semi-square between them. As this waxing semi-square belongs to a very early stage, a very first stage of the journey. This is a 30 degrees. So here, what was born as an idea is being focused. It's being kind of, we're trying to realize, obviously, the moon is passing on a message that she took from Mercury, and Mercury being the planet of intellectual development and brain activity or a cognitive, let's say, action, nervous system, many keywords that we can connect with Mercury. Maybe this was something of an intellectual idea, a project. Let's imagine it as a project. And now the moon is the delegate out there that needs to make that project a reality. Maybe we want to build a house, and at the conjunction, the plans were drawn. The architectural plans were drawn for the house. Now the moon is at 30 degrees. Probably the architect is sitting at the desk and looking at the plans and trying to focus on what's really going on here and how eventually I can start making that happen. But first I need to understand the plans. Yeah, that's how I imagine it in my head. Then we reach the 60 degree. And here, those phases that I've listed for you on the side in the circle correspond to the blue and the green aspects. You see how we have different colors. So the green ones are these 30, 150, 210, and 330, while the blue ones are 60, 120, 240, and 300. Yeah, and then of course we have the red ones, but only here the square, 0, 90, 180, 170. The rest of them are not part of our list here. They're just splitting the circle into even smaller or other number. For example, we can have the circle divided by 5s, divided by 7s, and that's how we get other stars inside that point to different, they also have meaning. And in the astrological aspects book, in the second half, where Rudhyar is actually writing, because the first half where these aspects are explained, this is his wife. But then in the second half, he's talking about those more unusual aspects, more not that common or not that commonly used ones, like for example the semi-square, the quintile, the biquintile, and so the septile. The septile, for example, is something very, very interesting for me lately, but that's another discussion. So, okay, where are we now? At the sextile stage, 60 degrees from one another. Now, organizing. Maybe the architect needs to start calling some builders now, or some other people that would start make the house a reality. This is the kind of the planning stage of the process. And the sextile is a very actional aspect, isn't it? There is a lot of movement, there is a lot of enthusiasm. Here it is this nascent enthusiasm of something new that needs to be realized out there and made happen. But it's not before the next stage, the square, when the two are square to each other, that we are finding ourselves at a position when, say, for example, if you have Mercury square the moon in your birth chart, static factor, that's the fact. That's how you found them when you were born. And they will be with you all the rest of the time like this. Then this means that your house, between that Mercury was trying to build with the moon, is now at the stage when the builders are starting to work on site and they're facing the first challenges of practical action, trying to meet, the environment and to also realize the plans. But it's all a struggle because everything needs to be put together, and there are different forces acting from different sides that are, being a factor, and it's not that easy to make them work together, isn't it? You have a client, you have an architect, you have the builder, you have the weather conditions, you have what the terrain is allowing you to do. You've got the suppliers of the materials. You see, you've got all those sorts of things that would not make it easy. So that's a square. And probably during the course of your life, you would find that when it comes to your moon and your Mercury, there will be challenges related to putting practical, ideas into practical action. And this is going to be an ongoing challenge for the person. Every now and then, that challenge will be activated by a transit when either one of the two planets receives a transit, or by a progression or something else. So you see how everything is starting to work together. Then when we move on, the trine, if everything went well, the architect hired the right people, instructed them properly, so they know what they're doing according to the plans. They supplied all the materials, so they've got things to work with. Now we have the trine. This is expressing. That means we can be productive now. We can really roll our sleeves now and get something done. And it's a flowing movement. It's a process which is, we've got everything that we need, and we're simply being creative with it. So you see how this corresponds to the feeling of the trine. We've got what we want. There are no obstructions. We are in a temporary action of productivity. Then we move to a quincunx, where maybe there is a bit of a shift now, a slight shift, not as much as a square would be, but here we are finding some in the process challenges, some adjustments. Maybe the builders found that the plans don't correspond 100% to the reality on site in the project, because maybe some factors were not seen when the plan was made, when the drafts were created. And only when the builders go there and some action has taken place, some physical activity, investigation of the conditions, say the soil or whatever else it is, then they have discovered what needs improvement, what needs adjustment or change. And then this is necessary to be done before the process is completed. Otherwise, the house is not going to be built. Or it may be built with a lot of problems, with a lot of potential cracks appearing later, or failure of the structure collapsing because people didn't correct or didn't oversee properly or didn't make sure that everything is managed correctly. So the quincunx is this aspect of management of how things went and how are we prepared for the combination and what we're going to receive in the combination, good or bad. So then we reach 180, the opposition or the equivalent of full moon, where we see what is the result and what kind of relationship was created between all the factors and where that led. Is there disappointment? Is there a failure? And from there, certain crisis then starts forming in the mind mostly, because we need to, put up with or start correcting ourselves. Maybe the architect has realized that he needs to go back to school and educate himself a little bit more before he takes on the next project, because things didn't work out very well. Or the other way around, they're starting to enjoy the results of their success. So realizing happens at the opposition stage, and then sharing of those results, good or bad, spreading them out, they start affecting more people. They start affecting maybe the wider community. Maybe this completed building can now be put to use. If it was a hospital, the hospital can start functioning as one. It's not just an empty shell and an empty, not being used for anything. It is starting to gather its meaning. So the second quincunx, the waning quincunx, is the very first aspect now that we meet after we have started the second cycle. So when we were starting the first half of the cycle, the first aspect was the semi-sextile. Now it's the reverse. Now, what was before the last one is now the first one. So you have another quincunx. This time, it is this one, 210, which corresponds to, on the other side, to, sorry, where are we? To the 150. So you see how the 150 was the quincunx just before the opposition. Well, the 210 is the quincunx just after the opposition. And here this is called sharing. Yeah, and maybe, yeah, as I said, the structure now is starting to have some proper use. Then we have a trine. This is well, maybe certain corrections and adjustments have to be made. As I said, either the architect goes back to school or some improvements are made to the building, because the whole thing is assessed on the opposition, and maybe something needs adjusting, or maybe promotion is needed. If the house was successfully, the building was successfully built, it needs to be, to get to the point where it's actually used, there is a mid stage, yeah? And this mid stage is the quincunx. Then we do that and go to understanding in the trine, where maybe now our example becomes a little bit less relevant, because maybe here somebody is sitting in an office and making some observations and thinking, did we do a good job here? Now, is that serving the purpose? The process is all very mental now. We're not engaged in building anything anymore, but we are kind of trying to understand maybe where we went wrong, where we went good, how we can promote even more what we're doing, make it more efficient. So this second trine serves a different purpose from the first trine. I hope you can see that. Next one is the square. Now here, there will be a problem of some sort, a challenge, let's say. Maybe 5 years down the line, some refurbishment is needed. Or we can see that something from outside is kind of, for example, maybe this hospital, if we say it's a hospital or a school or something like that, needs to expand. And it's already too small. There are more people wanting to use it than the structure allows. So it's kind of reaching another turning point in its development where it needs to change. It needs to rise up to a new level. Something needs to be improved. Not because it was necessarily broken, maybe it was broken, and now we are seeing really challenging results of that. But even if everything went well, after some time, we need to adjust ourselves. We need to make sure that this is really up to date for, like we're trying to update our astrology. Maybe we can say we're going to a second square of reevaluating and making those judgments. Is this working? Is this technique already obsolete and it's not really serving a very good purpose? Or maybe we should invent another technique and add it to what we're already using. This is the moment of mental crisis, of doing all those evaluations and decisions. A decision needs to be made here. How to proceed? Shall we close that hospital and go build another bigger one? Or shall we expand it? Or something else? Yeah. And then we have 2 more steps in the basic, frame. We have reached 270 with the second square. Now, next step is a 300. And this is another sextile because that's 60 degrees before the next new moon, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that's why it's another sextile. Because now the moon is approaching the moment when it will meet Mercury again. And this whole mission would have been completed, realized, thought about, shared, the maximum of it done as much as it was possible and kind of run its course. And a time will come very soon after 2 more steps when the 2 planets will need to meet again and start a new project. So the architect will receive a new job. And hopefully he would make the right conclusions of the success and failure of the previous job and will be able to start a new cycle. Now, obviously, this time Mercury and the Moon will meet in another sign of the zodiac, and they would be able to realize something else. Some other sort of building would be this time around. But here now, in the sextile before the end, we are reorganizing. We are reorganizing because it's also quite exciting. This is sextile. We are doing this with an enthusiasm facing a possible future, the new cycle that's approaching, because maybe now the person wants to close the books and in a good way, close the accounts in a way, pay everybody that needs to be paid, leave the legacy behind, say this is going here, the other thing is going there. It's a letting go, a process. That's why the whole second part of the cycle is a letting go process of gradually, almost like an old person is preparing their legacy and is preparing what they're going to leave behind, but they're not doing it necessarily with sadness or with grief or with some sort of fatalistic feeling. It's a sextile. You have this sense of completion. You have achieved a lot. You've got a lot to give out, and you're simply reorganizing your resources so that you can do it in the best possible way and wanting it. So that's the 300 sextile. And finally, the release point, which is symbolically so similar to the balsamic moon stage in any cycle of relationship, where darkness comes, we are preparing to close to turn the page, but not there yet. But this is the magical moment when the new seeds are planted for the next cycle. And here is really what is going to be either thrown away or will remain as seeds for the next cycle. Only small bits, and a lot of releasing happens in the second semi-sextile, the very last 30 degrees before the 2 planets meet again and start something new. And here it's a symbolical death, yes, but it is also a potential rebirth. So going back to my improvised example, I guess some of those things that participated in the process of building the hospital could be reused and continued forward for the next project. Maybe some of the materials could be reused. Some of the people can be approached again, or could be something non-physical, like those lessons that the architect learned. He's now a more experienced architect at another level. He's now able to bring this experience into the new cycle and transform it and put it again into an actional use from new moon to full moon, once on something different when the two meet again. So I hope that made sense to you. Any questions? Any comments on that? Do you see the process?
I I have a few questions. Few different questions. I don't know how to order them exactly, but I'll just start with where my mind went to first. If you were talking about, say, for example, and thank you, by the way, for doing this breakdown with the analogy with the building of the house or hospital. I appreciate that because it helps me to conceptualize it a little bit differently. So thank you for that. I can kind of see the process in terms of a story. So that helps me. Thank you. Um, if you were talking about the moon and Mercury, for example, just as an example, and you mentioned that you're looking at the one that moves the fastest between those two and considering that more of the moon, is that, I guess, is correlating to the moon. In the lunation cycle. So are you saying that as you're moving from each phase to phase, it's the planet that moves the fastest that's kind of um, leading the way, so to speak, or the planet that moves the fastest is the one that's kind of like the energy that's moving out? Is that what you're saying?
The planet which is moving faster between the two is like the agent of the other one. So if we imagine that the slower one is like a sun that is giving out a new idea, impulse, or direction, something like that, it is setting the direction. Then the faster planet is distributing that over the course of the period of this gradual like change of relationship between the two. It's almost like the faster planet is the one that really puts it in action because it travels the way, and it is the one that appears to be making one full circle and coming back to the slower one. It is not always that visible when we have the moon and Mercury, because Mercury is also moving pretty fast, and by the time they meet again, they will probably meet, much further down the zodiac, let's say, than where they met the last time around. But there are situations when, if you take, for example, Saturn, and then you have Saturn with the moon, which is, for example, the moon is the fastest factor of all of them. But maybe moon is not best here. Say Venus and Saturn. Venus being a personal planet is obviously a lot faster. Venus makes its full circle around the sun and around the zodiac, obviously, for comparably so much faster than Saturn. And when we observe that in the transits, because in the birth chart we have a set thing, they are in an aspect, and that's the aspect, and we see following that what we did just now, maybe we can make an association. Oh, so my Saturn and Venus had reached this stage of their partnership. But when we look at the transits, we can see that Saturn is kind of staying in the same place or very close to the same area, while Venus is making one full circle and appears to be coming back to it. So symbolically, the conjunction is the moment when the two join, they mix, they really merge together. And there is a short moment when there is no distinction between the function of Venus and the function of Saturn. And they really are almost like impregnating one another, but actually the Saturn is the one impregnating the Venus, and then Venus is taking the message and going forward with it, and kind of running its course, running its development, being somehow affected and trying to affect other things through that. So at the moment, if we look at the sky, I don't know, I don't remember the reality, but if you look at the ephemeris and you see where is Saturn, where is Venus, you can realize what Venus doing for all of us at the moment as a factor, as a effect, let's say. maybe a bit of a prediction kind of thing, by seeing when last time was Venus affected by Saturn, when they last started their cycle, and then what's the cycle of Venus with the rest of the planets, especially the slow ones, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and then that reveals a Venus which is a lot more comprehensive to understand than just Venus being in Aquarius or Pisces, I think it is at the moment, and that's it. Yeah. So you can see how in the system it is now being some sort of a delegate to each one of the other planets, but it's doing something different for each one of them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's almost kind of like the way I'm thinking about it as you're explaining it is Venus kind of takes on a career, so to speak, for each relationship that it has to each planet, and it's acting in that role, in that position, as it's carrying the energy of Saturn forward. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So as it touches each planet, it kind of, it wears this hat, then it wears this hat, and it just moves on. But with taking the intention of Saturn as it goes.
Absolutely. Yes. And for example, we should always remember the initial moment, the conjunction. So if you find Venus square Saturn right now, yeah, first of all, we check is it the first square or the second, but let's say it's the first. It's they're 90 degrees apart after the conjunction. And then if we want to understand what Venus is doing in that relationship, we need to go back to the beginning and check in the ephemeris. When was it when the conjunction happened, in what sign of the zodiac that was, and what maybe degree as well, if we want to check the Sabian symbol as well. This is going to give us an idea of the initial impulse, the message, the main direction of the last cycle that these two planets started together. And then this has this parallel to the new moon before birth that we slightly talked about last time. It's the same thing. Why do we go back to the new moon before birth? Because we assume the moon and the sun are fundamental for each one of us. They're the two lights, the two sides of the personality, the main factors of dynamic. And then we are looking at their relationship between one another. And we are born under a cycle of their relationship. When did it start? 2 days before we were born, 1 week before we were born, maybe almost a month. When we check that, we see the impulse of this initial thing that we happen to be, we appeared while this was ongoing. Yeah. And I find that the new moon before birth is always something very personal, actually. For even though we may argue everybody born during that lunar month has the same new moon before birth, but then obviously it falls in different houses in your chart. Maybe there are planets in your actual chart, your birth chart, that are in the same place or in some sort of aspect to that point where the new moon was before you were born. And it's worth it investigating that, I think. It's quite important.
So when that happens, say for example that you have a planet in your chart that falls on the exact degree of your prenatal new moon, is that to say that there's something about the imprint of when you were born that is fulfilling the intention of that new moon? Would you say that?
Yes, I think you're very right here. At least that's how I think about it. The last two slides were my recommended books, but I also have recommended articles. And what you asked about is in one of them. So on Codia, you can find this article by Rudhyar, New Moon Before Birth. So it's in there, he discusses this possibility of having a planet or something going on between the place where the new moon before birth was and your, say, if your Mercury is there, then Mercury becomes really connected to that message. Or maybe this is an indication that this person is more personally involved with the lunar month message during which he or she was born, than another person that's got no dynamic interaction between this point and something in the chart. If that makes sense.
Yes, my Mars is on my prenatal new moon.
And that converts your Mars into an accent in your chart, in that case. And it's going to be important for that reason. That's for sure. Because
Alright.
this is not just a point. This is a special point, let's say. Very special for that chart. So yes. Anything else?
Can I ask something, Radilina?
Simona?
It's really going back to the lunation cycle bit that you were showing us the chart, and you were here, yes, and you were going through on the phase mandala bit. You were going through the different ages. For example, you were saying that at the first square, it would be age 21. And then I think you went on to say the other ages. Did you go through, I'm sorry, but I was probably inattentive. Did you go through the different ages through the stages of that mandala?
Not in very much detail, but if you're interested in that, I had a talk about the Saturn cycle of the different ages some time ago, which is on my page. It's
okay,
but you have a video for every stage. It's a short video for every. It's only audio actually.
Okay.
And every age is connected. This is literally the Saturn cycle because we split it in 7-year periods of kind of gradual growing up. And what I was following in that talk at the time when I was covering those ages was the information from Cycles of Becoming by Alexander Ruperti.
Okay.
It's one of my favorite books, and
Yes.
as you probably know, he's a student of Rudhyar and a collaborator. And this book is very much following, all the concepts that Rudhyar developed, but summarized in such a way that I believe this person has a talent for putting into very short paragraphs a lot of meaning. So you have, yes, the same one. I've got.
Listen, I have to say this. Do you know how old this book is in my library?
Well, I imagine it's very old. It was written in 41.
40 years I've had it.
40 years.
And I have not read it yet.
Oh,
I mean, I've read bits, but I knew that I had to read it. And I bought it such a long time ago. So thank you. Yes. It's just amazing. The synchronicity is just amazing. Thank you. I have to read it.
That's a very, valuable book for me. One of the best.
Okay, that makes complete sense. I shall investigate that.
It's not only about Saturn. There are the cycles of the other planets briefly, go through. Very, very interesting information. Which is everything is following this process approach that we discussed today, and just applying it in practice to different stages between. And I really love his descriptions about what happens as crucial crises in different ages of Saturn. So in my talk, I only covered up to age 60, the second Saturn return, but you can go on from there and you can figure it out up to 84, which is then bringing us into the Uranus cycle. It's amazing how the Uranus and Saturn cycles, they kind of blend together because, we have with Uranus this 12 times 7. So if we repeat the process 12 times, we get to, to this final stage. So yeah, these are the books that I wanted to show you this time. Obviously, the astrological aspects on which almost everything is based on, especially this classification of aspects belonging to first half of cycle, second half of cycle, and the different meaning. And then Cycles of Becoming by Ruperti. And finally, the book that laid the foundation for the patterns in the chart, The Guide to Horoscope Interpretation by Mark Edmund Jones. Again, very old. I can show you. That was it. Yeah, mine is like a some sort of second hand found in by chance somewhere. But maybe I'm not sure whether it's available to buy. Maybe it is. It's really interesting, even though. As Rudhyar says, Mark Edmund Jones, like everybody else, including Rudhyar, is subject to his own philosophical thinking and background and knowledge and who he was affected by and so on. He comes from a slightly older generation than Rudhyar, so obviously this has been a bit updated by Rudhyar in his own classification, but he really stresses how important that book is, as it laid the foundation of looking at the chart as a whole picture.
Thank you. Yes, I've got that book as well, actually. I bought them, about 40 years ago. And I mean, the Mark Edmund Jones, I use it a lot to look at the different, as we were looking at the different, aspects or not configurations of the chart. Absolutely.
Yes, I'm glad.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't have this one here in the list. Maybe I showed it to you last time. Person-centered astrology. It's a compilation of essays by Rudhyar at a later stage when he's kind of summing it up. And there is a lot about aspects. There is one whole section of the book related to today's talk, like the idea of form, of accent, then of this process-oriented approach to aspects, and also the geometrical formation of aspects too. He's talking something that I didn't have time to mention is that we're not completely disregarding the geometrical formations, like that the whole split is a result of dividing the circle into equal 30 degrees, or then equal sections of 5s, 7s, 8s, and so on and so forth, where we get other aspects like, for example, the semi-square here, 45, 135, 225, and so on. They are also important aspects. And they are now, for example, the very interesting for me, 5126, which is an irregular number, the sextile. It could be extremely creative and extremely interesting. That aspect is in a way related to Chiron. That's what I discovered lately, because 5126 is like when you divide the circle into sevens, and the fundamental meaning of number 7, as we saw today. But Chiron goes around the sun in about 51 years. So 5126 corresponds to the orbital period of Chiron. So I think this is so many different layers can be discovered here. And I think this illustration here is a reminder that all these interactions are active all the time and one over the other, basically. So it's very difficult to judge when we're observing a situation in somebody's life and looking at the chart, what really is the cause of the external event? Is it a current square? Is it a current something else? What is the highest, charged factor? And maybe more than one, maybe more than 3. So that's something to just also have in mind. And then these are just articles in the page, planetary octaves and rulership. Here there are interesting ideas by Rudhyar about a different, in some cases, interpretation about what rules what and why. Yeah, and the exaltation of the planet is also another exploration with lots of different ideas, original ideas, which are not the standard way we're thinking about it. So yeah, lots of recommendations today. I hope that was helpful. We still have a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes, if you guys want to ask something or discuss anything else or comment.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can go to the chart that has the yes, this one right here. So say for example, if someone in their natal chart they have these two important, two planets that are in opposition to one another. And so that static, we're saying that that's the dynamic that they came here with. That's just the relationship between the two. Are you saying that as that person is growing and developing, there's something about that relationship that's being asked to push into the next phase? So say, for example, when they're born with these planets in opposition to one another, so then in the first stage of their life, is there a story that's being told that is,
Preconditioning.
I don't know, maybe asking them to push into the sharing phase?
Yeah, exactly. You're getting it really well, Robin. That's actually the conclusion that we are supposed to see out of all of this. That in order for, that's how I think about it. In order for me to have been born with an opposition between, in my case, I only have one. It's Sun and Jupiter, between Sun and Jupiter. Then there is a story behind that. Yes, you're right. There is something preconditioned that. And yeah, we need to go deeper if we want to, like, we are astrologers, most of us, but let's say if we want to really go deeper and to investigate, we can go back to when they were conjunct and see when was that? How long ago before I was born? In what degree of the zodiac? What was started then? Were there any other planets around them? Maybe when my sun was where Jupiter was, then there was something else there too. Yeah, or something else opposing. So it's worth looking at the chart of the moment of the conjunction. Because this whole chart of, at the end of the day, this whole state of the solar system, when the two planets were together, is what is presupposing the whole journey. And then now you are living in your chart the most critical, opposition stage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I think you're into something there with this, definitely. Anything else? So maybe we should switch to gallery view so I can see you better. Almost at the end. Any other questions? Anything else you guys want to share?
I just wanted to ask, what is the next thing you're going to be sharing next week?
Good question. Transits and progressions is the next step.
Say it again.
Transits and progressions.
Transits and progressions.
So next time we're going to make the comparison, try to explain what is one, what is the other, how they differ, what's the meaning of them in the chart. And so, yes, maybe I haven't yet prepared what I'm going to share with you next time. I always do it week for week, but I'm planning on some examples. So I recently spoke to Simona and I was going to ask her if she wants to volunteer for me to show a couple of progressions and transits in her chart, just as an illustration of how they can reveal extreme coincidences, I don't know how to call them otherwise, between something crucial that happens and where things are located in this moment. So that's going to be next week.
Thanks.
That's fine with me, Radilina.
Thanks for the permission. I was going to write you an email, but now that we haven't raised it.
You've been brilliant.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you are here, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.